this episode of Future Data Leadership Podcast, Robin discusses his experience running EPA. Stay tuned. Thank you everyone for coming to another episode of Future of Data Podcast. Today we have with us Robin Thottungal, Chief Data Scientist at EPA. Robin is the EPA's first data scientist, Chief Data Scientist focused on creating and implementing an agency-wide vision on analytics for effective decision making. Prior to joining EPA, Robin was at Deloitte Consulting, where he focused on selling and delivering large-scale analytical projects for public sector and commercial clients. He also led global big data community of practice for big data for Deloitte and developing analytical framework and go-to-market strategy for big data and analytic solutions. So, Robin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. So, I think when I was reading your it's mouthful. It's a lot of good keywords squished together. So one thing when I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, when I was trying to reach out, you have a fabulous public-private experience throughout your journey, and I don't know if I've captured enough. So love to sort of have you discuss your journey through big data analytics and leading us to the current role of being the first chief data scientist at EPA.
Oh, definitely. I would be happy to. And I think, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. And I hope that I can share some of my life experiences for the upcoming leaders in data science or data related fields. So I think when I was thinking about how do I approach this question, I think one thing that kind of came to my mind is growing up, I grew up in India, and my dad is a clinical psychologist. So as a kid, I was always around my dad, and I have been to his hospital. I have seen how he helps people. So when I was growing up, one of the things that I was always fascinated by is how can I take what I have learned from my parents and make it as a part of my professional life. So when I finished my engineering degree in computer science or computer engineering, I came back out of the computer engineering degree, and I realized that there is a tremendous potential for bringing in engineering principles into solving some of the challenges that we have in biomedical sciences or any kind of health-related fields. So that led me to more biomedical-related research activities. In fact, I did some research at National Institute of Health, where I focused on bringing in some computational techniques onto designing next generation drugs, or how can we think about how the diseases propagate in a specific fashion in a network. So that as you can imagine, once I started working in these fields, that I started to deal with a large volume data set. If you look at genomics data set or bioinformatics, you know that it's a tremendous volume of data is generated by these next generation biomedical technologies. So that naturally took me from my for the geeks out there, from a single server programming world to more supercomputers and more large scale volume analytical techniques. So that helped me to gain a footing into this new area of big data and analytics. And in 2006, I believe in 2006, when Google came up with the paper on the big data, paper on the Hadoop platform, I was there, and I had an opportunity to start looking at what Hadoop means and how can we bring into the biomedical world. And one of the exciting parts in my professional life, and I'm very grateful, is I had an opportunity to join Deloitte, where I had the ability to work on public sector consulting. So that led me to move to Washington, D.C., and I worked at Deloitte, and where I have looked at the concept of big data and analytics and how we can use that to take our public sector clients at that point to the next level. What can we do with big data, and how can we change the way we work at the way the U.S. government works? And now in 2.5 years ago, or to almost 2 years ago, I was asked to look into the possibility of joining EPA as its first chief data scientist. And
Mm.
when I heard about the opportunity, and when I read a bit more into this one, I realized that this will give me an opportunity to go into the middle of the fire and try to understand how can I become more effective in adopting or bringing in these technologies into an organization. So I think the exciting part for me now on a day-to-day basis is I am part of an organization, specifically EPA, which has a lot of value in this 21st century, and try to think about how can I bring data as a core component of agency's mission, and how can I bring in technologies that has made companies like Google and Facebook very successful, and see how I can bring that into the agency to make the next wave of innovation within EPA.
Fascinating, I think, and thank you so much, by the way, for walking us through this exciting journey. So, I think when I was reading you as being EPA's first chief data scientist, it has a lot of things going for it, right? So, EPA, a government body, you being the first guy, first like chief data scientist. So, what are some of the challenges that you face being the first? And I think most of our followers and most of our community members, they are probably the first in leading this charge, and it's a very new phenomena and very. So, what are some of the challenges that you faced, and if you can share some light, that will be beautiful.
So I think, if I want to break it down to the challenges, right? Because there are a couple of dimensions that you have to look at this, right? One is the dimension of people and how the organization works. One, two is the concept, or look into the technology as another aspect of what is what if you look at the technology adoption curve, and where does your organization lie in that adoption curve. So I can go a bit more detail into what each of these means
Hmm.
from my experience at EPA. So when I joined the organization, a couple of things that we were looking at was, okay, from a technology dimension, what is the adoption of the agency with respect to some of these new technologies? How much NoSQL databases became a mainstream component within the agency's day-to-day activities, or are we leveraging new technologies like Hadoop, or are we leveraging new technologies like Spark to do some of our analytics on a faster and a more real-time basis? So what that resulted in was, like, I started having conversation with my upper leadership, and as well as the people who are working on this one, to see, hey,
Hmm.
how can we bring these technologies into the organization and start showing the early values and early wins, thereby getting more and more support for us. So that one thing we did there was, we built a cloud computing solution that helped us to get to some of these technologies on a faster time frame, and then start identifying appropriate partners within the agency to leverage that technology to solve some of their day-to-day mission related activities. Now, on the people side, I think this is another
Hmm.
interesting dimension, and I think the more I work in public sector, I'm getting more and more drawn into this question of how do we get the organization moving from the old ways of doing things to new way of doing things, right? I think the way I usually explain this to my staff or people around me is, uh, over and over again we have seen this concept of diffusion curve, the technology diffusion curve. And what that is one example that I think everybody can relate to is, of all the people who are listening to this podcast now, probably there is a few of them stood in line in 2006 to get the first iPhone, right?
Hmm.
Those are the people who are considered as the early adopters. And when I look at technology adoption in any kind of organization, the same pattern happens. There is some people in this organization, or every organization, who is willing to take the first step and say, hey, I don't know what this is exactly, but I see that this will change the way my life is going to be. And those are the people who stood in line to get the first iPhone. So in
Hmm.
that dimension, what we have done is we have established a community of practice within EPA, focusing on data science, data analytics, as well as data visualization. And that community of practice helped us to identify people who are that early adopters, who is willing to work with me and my team to create some solutions that will change the way the business is done before. So that is the way in which we tackle that problem.
Interesting, interesting. So I think so your one of the statement about old ways to new ways phenomena. I think I was having a conversation with NOAA, is one of their lead at one point in the past, and he shared actually a very interesting perspective. He said, Vishal, there are two breed of scientists. So one is the old breed, very secretive, very model oriented, sort of very methodical in their research, and then there's a new breed who actually are very social. They believe in sharing, collaboration, and all that. And there's a massive fix between creating a bridge between these two sort of emerging, or a massive cultural sort of diaspora that exists in government bodies. So what are some of your thoughts in the EPA context, how are you addressing this, and are you seeing this, and what's going on, that so if you can shed some light.
Oh, definitely. I think one of the things that I'm seeing now is so data science. Think this is the new wave or the new terminology that we have coined, right? So data science will change eventually to something else. So if you peel the onion of what people call as data science, fundamentally it will trickle down to a couple of areas, right? One is, if you want to think about a true data science practitioner, I see that person should have a good understanding of mathematics and statistics. At the same time, he or she should have a good understanding of how to program these things, like the computer programming aspect of things. And on top of that, that person should have the domain knowledge of the area that you are focusing on. And finally, the good data scientist always has the ability to tell the story of what they are doing in a language that is easy for people to understand. So what I'm trying to cultivate in the organization is, rather than trying to bin people into different buckets, the question is, okay, if you want to cultivate a culture within the organization to embrace the concept of data, what should I do, right? And this is where the concept of self-service model becoming more and more prominent, I think. For example, one thing that we have done after I joined the organization was we created a visualization platform as a service for the agency. And in less than 12 months of deploying that service, we have seen more than close to 1,000 applications deployed on that platform, as well as close to 800 people being a part of it. So the difference in the approach that I'm trying to take here is, can I provide the tools to the people in the organization and let them run with it, right? Rather than me dictating, okay, here is the tool and you have to use it this way. What I've been trying to do is, here is a platform that will enable you to do data visualization. Here is a platform that will enable you to do data analytics, right? And then we let them run with whatever they want to do on the platform, so that they can create the next generation of solutions. And at the same time, there are some part of the organization that is saying that, okay, I see the value of these tools and technologies, but I am not sure how to use it. So on that side, what we have done is, coming from my consulting background, we are establishing a consulting model within my team. Nice. Who can work with other folks and say, hey, so you see there is a value, but you don't know how to use it. Let us help you through the first stages, right? So that's what we are doing in the consulting side of things. So I think that will help us to move forward, because otherwise, if you start defining, okay, I have one type of data scientist, another type of data scientist, then I will end up creating a dictionary of different types of data scientists. I don't want to do that, right? I mean, I don't think that's going to be productive, because people have different way of looking at this.
Right. No, I think you touched upon a very beautiful point. I think I'm recalling one of my conversation with one of the big insurance companies in US, and they were discussing about this idea of, as soon as the big data keyword hit in, their HR was on the job to recruit the top talent, so just to check off the talent, but the use cases wasn't prepared yet, the businesses are not prepared yet, whatever, right? So now these guys are recruited, and now they're trying to figure out what are some of the business use cases. And as you rightly pointed out, they started sort of becoming the advocate of data-driven culture. So they become that consulting, or they start providing this consulting services to create the awareness of why they should exist in the company, when there's a big cultural sort of, I don't know what's going on, and it's a new keyword to me. I'm still a very gut-based decision-making organization, and now you're telling me that data probably could help me decide. So, what are some of your sort of I would say about your current role? How much of your role is exposed to something like this, like exposed to providing consulting and support to other sort of functions which are not really data savvy, and sort of trying to create educate, and how much of your role is really just getting the ball rolling on the data, on the data center of excellence within the EPA?
So I think a couple, my days are very. I don't think I can say that my 2 days are same, right? Because one of the things that I'm doing is within the. So my role, since being the first chief data scientist for US EPA and being the first in the US federal government to be a chief data scientist at the agency level, I have a responsibility to. Or I've been working with the previous chief data scientist for US EPA, US White House, DJ Patel, to think about how do we embrace this for the entire federal government, right? So couple of things that we have been doing here was, one is my role is trying to think about how would I use what I am learning at EPA to infuse into other organizations, and how can they think about using data science as a way to make the agency more data driven, right? That is one. Another one is I constantly meet with the different parts of the organization at the management level and try to understand, hey, what are the constant problems that you have in your mind that you like to solve, right? You don't need to be data savvy, but you can tell me, Robin, I am worried about this. I am worried about this aspect of it. And then what we will do is we will start asking the question, okay, do you think that there is a scenario or a world where you think that you can use some kind of data to inform that decision that you have to make on the problem that you are worried about? And then that conversation usually goes down to a path where they say, okay, if I look at these two data and if I see these values, I can think that, okay, this is a scenario that I should be, that I'm dealing with. So that is one way. And another aspect of my time is spent on working with my team and my staff to think about, okay, what would we do to build the appropriate capabilities within the organization? What kind of services that we have to build? So it's like, if I have to bin into those three buckets, that would be the three buckets.
Interesting. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I think one of the recent conversations that we find ourselves into a lot nowadays is creating center of excellence with data as a center of it, right? So creating those, now there are data lakes, now there are a lot of good practices already out there. There are Hadoop clusters, everything is pretty much out there. Now, what are some of the best practices you could extract from all this infrastructure and sort of all these capabilities that have been built for the last couple of years to generate insight? What's your take? Like, where are you guys on the maturity level when it comes to EPA, and what are some of the key insights that you have captured from your experience in EPA?
So I think one thing that I can so I'm not sure what is the mix of people who will be listening to the podcast. So let me give you a view into the first thing. First challenge would be, if you want to change the culture of an organization to become more data driven, we need to identify people who can be the change agent, right? In the public sector practice, one of the challenges that we usually see is the ability to recruit people on a faster time frame. So the question is, how can we get people on board on a faster time frame so that we can put them as the change agents for these kind of new technologies or new waves? So one thing that we are doing is, instead of trying to do the traditional commercial way of identifying people with appropriate skills and bringing them on board, what we are trying to look at is, okay, do we have enough people in this organization who has the necessary skills but not the complete skills, and how do we close the gap between where they should be and where they are now? So we are looking at training and other the training materials. We are using the community of practice as a way for people to start sharing their experience and their journey of how they become more data driven within EPA. So that is one way we are seeing this becoming more and more a part of the organization. On the technology side of things, what we are looking at is, okay, we, to some extent as an organization, I am convinced that cloud-based solutions will be much more appropriate for us at this point to bring some of these capabilities in. So we are doing a couple of pilot projects on different cloud platforms to identify what are the different technology stacks that we need to bring on board into the cloud to make it more effective. So I think those are the two things that I can think of that we are doing here. On the maturity scale, it fluctuates, right? Because on the federal government side, there are some things that we are adopting faster than some other agencies, but there are places where we are not in the front. So it's like a mixed bag of maturity curve, I would say.
Interesting, interesting, and thank you so much for sharing that. By the way, so now let's talk about three of the most visible challenges that you find working with a public entity, like working with a government agency. So I know there it has this full share of migrants for you, but what is like one of the three top challenges that you see that it would be awesome if you would have known that and that would have helped.
I mean, so if you look at the challenges that you see, the challenges that I face day to day or day to day basis in pushing these kind of things moving forward, right? One is definitely if you are thinking of bringing, and let's say if I take the scenario of a person who is brought on board by the leadership to become the change agent with respect to data science, here are the few things that you should look at. Like, one question would be, what is the buy-in of your leadership in making this change, right? I mean, so is the leadership fully on board with the idea of making data, using data as a driver for decision making? That is one thing that is very critical for you as a person being successful in an organization. That is one. So fundamental leadership buy-in into what you think you need to do to make the agency or organization more data driven. And another aspect from a public sector standpoint is, how do we make sure that we can stay close to the mission that we are destined to do, and make sure that there is enough ways to continue that path forward. So in that aspect, the question becomes empowering the people within the organization to do the work and do the activities that they have to perform to adhere to the mission of the organization. And that is why I think the self-service model is very critical, because on a day-to-day basis, I hear from people saying that we are glad that you have this kind of a platform as a service in the agency, so that I don't have to worry about something not there, right? It's almost like, think about the benefit of having a telephone on every person in an organization. Now they can pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, I have an issue, can you help me? Similar to that, I think the vision is to make sure that we can have tools and technology on the hands of the people who actually need to drive the mission. So that is the second challenge, and the way we are addressing it is building more self-service models. And the third one would be, how do we, so technology is one, people is another aspect, and finally the question would be, public sector always has to steer itself to see, okay, where things are going, what we are going to do, how we are going to move the mission forward, right? So staying on course with the mission and making sure that we can continue to support the mission that we are supposed to support, that will be another challenge. How do we steer through the noise versus signal that you have to continue?
Interesting. So let's talk about collaboration and the ability of platform to actually and this, I was discussing the same thing with this Noah guy a couple of years back now. So I think the discussion was that these agencies are extremely collaborative because there are vendors involved, there are sort of scientists involved, there are a lot of sort of and the platform that we need to build should be capable of like massive level of collaboration. I think, and you touched briefly about making it self-serve, so actually people can just get a taste and sort of get delivered and whatever. So when you work on that system and you need to put something up together, like what are some of your I would say first 3 or 4 steps that comes to your mind when you actually come into a system which is sort of extremely collaborative, at the same point sort of getting insights and solving some of the hardest problem in the world. So what are some of the things that comes to your mind when you design or pretty much overlook such system?
So I mean, when I define self-service, the way I usually tell this to the staff is, the thought process is, think about what happened when you go log into Google, right? When you log into Google, you have a email system already there. You have a calendar there. You already have a drive for storing your files. So the idea is, for me, or the vision that I have, is creating a platform where people can log in and have already specific paths they can take to make sure that, okay, if somebody logs into the system and say, hey, I want to do data visualization, okay, so this is the path I have to take to get my data visualization. And somebody else will come in and say, okay, I am interested in doing more analytics on the data that I have, so I'm going to do the analytics, and then I'm going to visualize the data, the outcome of the analytics that I have done in the other platform that I have, right? So the question is always user-centric, right? Because, I can, based on what I just talked to you now, we can talk about 20 different ways, 20 different visualization platforms that we can pick based on, our criteria. And also I can give you 5 to 10 types of analytics notebook that I can pick based on what I think I want to have, right? But at the end of the day, the question is, if you are a user within this platform, what would be the journey for that person should look like? So the biggest one of my recommendation, and one of the tidbits that I will give to the listeners of the podcast would be always put the user first, right? And what are the challenges the user has, and how do you make sure that that is taken care of? Do not chase a technology, because technology always will change. And this is coming from a core engineering graduate, right? So I love technology, but at the same time, technology alone is not going to solve the problem. There is an adoption that has to happen along with the technology to make it successful. So the question always is, put the customer first, user-centric design. How do we do that? And how do we make sure that whatever you are picking as a technology stack can be used by the people who wants to use it?
I think that's well said. Always put user first. I think that's a very, very stable and very clarifying line for sure, if someone is delving into this kind of work. So I think so. Now let's talk about your perspective. Also, there I think 3 words that are emerging nowadays. So, chief data officer, chief analytics officer, chief data scientist, and recently I came to know about chief data strategist, which is actually beautiful. But yes, so I'm probably talking to this guy as well. So what is your thought about these keywords? Like what do they mean to you, and like can you shed some light on that? What's your perspective on these 3 titles, so as to speak?
So let's look back. Let's step back a bit and think about this one for a second, right? And irrespective of the title name that we are looking at, the question is, or more than the question, or the drive that I have seen in the industry these days is, irrespective of if you're in public sector or financial sector or healthcare, is people or organizations are starting to understand the fact that data is also an asset for us. And if we use the data properly, we can become more effective as an organization, right? Now, so if you look at the title, for example, chief data officer versus chief data scientist or chief analytics officer, right? As long as the person is fundamentally looking at the problem of how do we make the organization more data driven, and how can I make use of my data more effectively, then that role is a much better role, much defined role. Now, what we have to see, this is something that we have to wait and see how it's going to play out, right? Because in the long term, which role will become most prominent role? I mean, is it going to be chief data officer, or is it going to be chief data scientist, or is it going to be chief analytics officer, right? So that's something that we have to see. But I think more and more I'm seeing CDS and CDOs in enterprises. So I think it will become a wait and see game to see if the CDO becomes CDO sticks or CDS sticks.
Interesting. And I think so one area that actually when he was discussing about about these 3 roles, that comes to my mind. So in a corporate world, you say, hey, culture is very important, right? Culture, like everything is, so a leader's job is to preserve a culture and then probably recruit technologies to sort of work around that culture. And to a many degrees, culture is the politics, or you can say that, right? So now if we sketch the same line to say government agencies, that's pretty much politics, right? So at that level, the culture becomes whoever is running the show at that point, right? So now we're talking about an agency where the technology also has to sort of, you have to be at the bleeding edge. At the same point, the culture should be agile enough to sort of work around the current architecture of whatever is. So what are some of your thinking on working through and designing a system for something like this, where sort of the culture is also moving pretty fast, because in corporate world the culture is not the problem. It's like for 130 years IBM knows what they're doing, like GE knows what they're doing, but in
Yeah,
case
yeah, yeah.
here, yeah, so if you can shed some light.
So I think, again, that is why I was saying that irrespective of what are the changes that happens around us, right? There are some fundamental rules that we have to follow, right? If you look at going back to, let's say if you take what is the mission of EPA, right? EPA is an organization that is set up to make sure that we can protect our environment and human health, right? That is a one line that should not or will not change irrespective of whatever happens around us, right? So what I would say is, in public sector, the most important thing, and again, this is for the people who are interested in coming to public sector, right? One of the dimensions that a data scientist or a data officer, whatever the title you have with respect to data, needs to understand is you need to understand the domain in which you are operating. And when it comes to public sector, and this is something that I know a lot of technologists are not excited to learn, but you need to understand the way in which each of these things comes to existence, right? So there are some rules, some regulation that we have to make sure that we will follow through. So in spite of whatever happens, right, those things needs to be executed. So I would start focusing on those core fundamentals and make sure that those core fundamentals get up to the next level of technology adoption curve. So this is where I think the signal to noise ratio becomes very important. You need to understand what is a signal and what is a noise, and you keep the signal and you move that forward, and some of them is going to be noise that you can ignore. That's what I would say. I mean, it's a very I know it's a very outside way of saying what I'm saying, but that's the way I would look at it.
No, I think that's beautiful. And again, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts there. So now let's talk about some of your thinkings around the future analytics and data leaders. Like what do you see from your lens? The world is shift. Like what do you expect from the future leaders when they're coming from data and analytics point of view? I think you shared a very good sort of common point is always put user first. I think that's beautiful. But what are some of your thinking that you expect the future leaders to deliver on, or at least start working on?
So I think a couple of things that will happen is that I think will happen in the next maybe hopefully half a decade would be is the solidification of concept of somebody at the C-suite level who is in charge of the data, right? So if you think about it historically, if you look at the history of the evolution of the corporate leadership, you will see that in the beginning there was CEO, then they created somebody called a CFO who is focused on the finance, right? And one of the later additions in the whole world of C-suites is a CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, right? And still we are trying to understand what a CTO means in different organizations, right? So similar to that, what will happen in the long-term component is we will start refining the role of somebody who is in charge of data within the C-suite. That's why when you're asking me about what do you think about CDS versus CDO versus a CAS, right? The difference is not the title, it's going to be the adoption of the concept of somebody who is in the C-suite who is going to be focused on data will become more and more solidified. So that is one thing that I will see happening. Now, on the data leader side of things, I think one advice I would give to folks is, and coming from my experience so far, is being a true data leader for an organization requires knowledge in multiple dimensions, right? Because now I'm talking about the vision for this organization, and right after this meeting I'm going into a meeting where I'm going to talk about how do we take a analytical model that's been deployed in some AWS infrastructure and start thinking about how do we move that model from that concept to a new technology platform with the new analytical ways of analyzing the data that they have been looking at. So as you can see, if you want to become a very effective data leader in the organization, you should be able to wear multiple hats. One is like, can you share the vision? Can you talk about these things without bringing in too much technology jargons into the picture so that the senior level leadership understands the value of these things? At the same time, do you have enough skills to talk to a scientist to say that, okay, I see that you are doing this model, but you are using this single server model, but you can distribute this so that you can get your analysis done in less than 2 hours. So can you communicate that to a person who is a user, right? So I think the advice to be start, if you are really interested in becoming one of the change agents with respect to data, I would start putting myself through all these different dimensions. If you have, do you have enough computer background? Do you have enough math and statistical background? Do you have enough visualization? Do you have enough knowledge about data visualization, how data visualization can be used to tell stories? And also, can you remove yourself from all these three dimensions and tell a story to a 6-year-old on the street and get that person excited about what you're talking about, right? So I think that would be my advice. You need to start expanding your knowledge in all these different dimensions.
Interesting. I think, and you raised a very, very interesting point, being able to communicate through a story. And I think that's even from our end, I think we hear a lot of good leaders just sitting at the back benches because they can't just communicate their doings into a business in a business value. So I think thank you for shedding light on that. So now let's talk about one of the philosophical question that I throw pretty much in all the conversation. So and so data science, right? Data science is primarily science, right? Science is mathematical model. It's predictable. It's designable. It's beautiful, right? And then the other thing that typically is the art of doing business. So if you look at the businesses run on two philosophy. So one is the art of doing business and the science of doing business. Science enable, hopefully the art, right? So now we are hearing this keyword a lot on data driven decision making, and it's a very powerful keyword. And in fact, many of my conversation I find myself into that where say, hey Vishal, don't just come, like, don't let me decide, you just decide and do it and build something that can do whatever, right? But then my sort of pitch to those guys is, hey, if you let science do the art, then probably your business model could update with the next software upgrade, right? So it's a very slippery slope in sort of retaining your competitive edge, which probably is the art of the business, or maybe art and science combined. But this data driven decision making is putting a lot of people at confusion of, hey, maybe I need to be 100% data driven decision maker or whatever the thing is. So what are some of your thoughts on this philosophical debate of is it more art or is it more science that data science of the future would have to deal with to sort of to get better answers for the business?
So I mean, Jay, let me make sure that I'm understanding the question. Like the question is, how do you see the involvement of art in the field of data science? Is that the fundamental question?
Yes. So basically, is data science more of an art or it's more of a science, right? So how is data science making sure that the art is not ruined, right? It's not AI is designed Michelangelo. It's not really a Michelangelo. So
yeah. So one of the pleasure I had after coming to public sector was I had the ability to work with DJ Patel, who was the chief data scientist at the White House for the previous administration, right? And he is one of the people who coined the term data science, right? So we had this discussion, and I had this conversation with DJ on, okay, DJ, the data science, how did this came to exist, and what do you think about it? So one of the things that he has shared with me was, data science. He coined the term data science at that point in time was because the challenges they had was they were looking for somebody who understands mathematics and statistics, but at the same time they should be good at computer science programming, and they should be able to understand the technology infrastructure on which you have to do all this work, right? So it's a very it's a merger of different fields together, and it was very difficult for the human resource department to start comprehending. Okay, so you are saying that you're not looking for a computer programmer, but you are also looking for a mathematics and statistics major, right? So that is the history behind how they came up with this term of data science, right? Okay, that is the way in which they realized that if you create this term data science and put the people who have these different skills into one bucket, now we can start identifying people who has the skill and tell the human resource or the recruiting side of the world that, okay, this is what we are looking for, and these people are called data scientists, right? So that is a little history behind how the terminology come to existence. Now, if we are going into the question of the philosophy of the science and the art in the science, I think that is almost a question that we have been addressing in every technology curve, right? Because
Right.
if you look at any component, the question that we have to ask is how much more, how much. So if the data is telling you to make a decision A, and if you know that decision A is not going to be the right thing, how do you bring the concept of art into that decision and say, okay, maybe I can just reduce that A to a bit, right? So for example, I think one thing that I start thinking about when I was trying to responding to this question would be, if you think about the buildings, right? Because from more and more we are seeing that people are trying to, or the we are building buildings that are more lending itself to the nature, right?
Right.
So that is one place that I'm seeing that where art is melding really well with the technology to say that, okay, technologically we have the best infrastructure possible, but the point is it's not just the infrastructure alone. There is an artistic component of where it exists, right?
Right.
So if I want to take, that is more that example is more realistic because it is physically, you can think about it. If you have just a concrete block in the middle of trees as a building versus a building that has enough glass and reflections that will lend itself to the background, then that is more appealing to you, right? So that is what you are seeing in the world of construction or civil engineering. So I think the same thing will happen in data science. The question becomes, okay, shall we just think about just dry data science, or shall we think about creating the right way of telling the story using data science? And I think you can see the penetration into the market of this concept of infographics, right? People telling story using data visualization and analytics, but
That's true.
just not numbers and graphs, right? There is a story behind it. So I think that will become more and more prominent. And I think, in fact, you're right. We need to think about the art aspect of the data science. And I think one of the things that we talk about, and one of the things that I do is I'm a part of the IEEE, and we talk about the need for putting A in STEM. So A is arts, STEM is the
Nice.
science,
Nice.
technology, engineering, math, right?
Nice.
Right, because we when we look at the high school education, people will say we need to put the kids through the STEM program. Yes, you can take your kids and teach them the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but you also need to put A in that STEM program, which is the artistic side of those all those four dimensions that I talked about. So definitely data science also will require that kind of thought process, and in fact education too.
Beautiful. I think that's well said. STEAM. I think even many we have heard about. I have a 5-year-old, so I think she is hearing about STEAM now more than STEM. So which is, so yeah. I think that's, as a new parent, I'm hearing that keyword a lot. So well said. So now let's talk about. So now you're the first chief data scientist of EPA. What are the first three candidates you would hire? So if suppose you come to this role and you're going to sort of start building something from scratch, so what are the three sort of first hires that you would hire, and sort of what are some of their traits? If you can share, that will be of that be of some help.
So I think, I think the traits that I would look for people that I want, if I have to build a data science capability or analytics capability within our enterprise, would be the people who have the people who would be willing to stay in the line in 2006 to buy the iPhone, because those are the people who will follow me through the challenges without saying, okay, I don't want to do this because I don't see this. But the trait of the people who stood in line in 2006 would be people are like, I don't exactly understand the complete value, but I truly believe that this is going to transform the world, right? So the how much of innovative and how much of a risk taker are you with respect to doing these kind of work? That is one. So in other words, are you afraid of failure, right? You should not be afraid of failure when you are
Interesting.
if you want to be a part of my team, and when it comes to these kind of situations. And another one would be the ability to look at problems that is not completely defined yet. Because when one thing I constantly see in the organization is people does not recognize or acknowledge the fact that I can solve a problem using data science, because they don't know that this is possible. So as a person, you have the ability to look at a problem that most people will look at and say, okay, this is too much noise, I don't understand what is going on, and say, okay, let me break it down and see if I can help the situation, right? This is one of the characteristics that makes good consultants. So that is one important aspect that I like to look in a candidate. And finally, these are good characteristics from a personality standpoint. From a professional standpoint, of course, I will be looking for people who has a I think a balance of background between the mathematical skills as well as the programming skills and technology, and also their ability to tell the story and convey the information in a fashion that is understandable for different levels of people at different levels of the management.
Beautiful. I think thank you so much. So being early adopter, not afraid of failure, being able to communicate better, I think these are all good qualities to have, definitely. And thank you so much for sharing that. Now I think we are at the tail end of our conversation, and I think I definitely want to hear your closing statement for our community, and yeah, what they should be focusing on. So any thought that comes to your mind for our, that will be really helpful.
So, I mean, if I'm picturing the listeners, and if the listeners are people who are either jumping into a role of becoming the change agent within an organization for making the organization more data driven, I think things that I think the most important thing that I would tell them is you need to start listen more, and also start learning the domain that you are put in, right? Because in other words, do not go into a conversation and talk about the fact that you can use deep neural networks to mine the pattern from the data that you have, right? Rather than having that conversation, you should be able to say that, look, the problem you are having is you cannot understand what is going on in the data set, and the business failure that you are having because of that problem is so and so. So why don't I think about helping you solving a problem using data science? So your ability to communicate in the language that they understand is very important. So if you are an upcoming data leader, and if you have specific domain that you are interested in, I highly encourage you to start thinking about learning the language of the domain that you are interested in, and so that you can communicate to the leaders in that domain in a much more effective fashion. And also, another one would be starting to think about how do you become more of a better listener, and start thinking about listening more so that you can understand and grasp what the challenges that they have.
Interesting. And with that, thank you so much, Robin, for being very candid and walking us through your journey, explaining what future leaders should do, discussing about your EPA background, your headaches, and some of the fun stuff that you're doing there. And love to have you over sometime in future, discuss your journey further. And thank you so much for spending time with our community and sharing your thoughts.
Oh, definitely. And, thank you, Vishal, for inviting me over to the podcast. And I really hope that the listeners have some good information from the conversation we had. And happy to help anybody out there to become more, making their enterprise more data driven.
Thank you so much, sir. And again, have a good day and good connecting with you.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on a